Chair. This item, the Recreation Needs Assessment, you're all familiar with. We've been down on this path for quite some time. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the history, but just very briefly, and then want to turn it over to our consultants to present the final draft report to you this evening. So in 2011, the department contracted with Sports Management Group to conduct a recreation needs assessment. We wanted to get a sense of the public's perception of our facilities and our programs, and also to be able to use that information with the recent update to the general plan, as well as to assist us in starting the master planning of Centennial Park, and actually also as a starting point for the update to the city's parks, recreation, and open space master plan. I think you're all aware that that master plan is now 21 years old, and we need to think about updating that. So the Recreation Needs Assessment identifies recreational needs, interests. It identifies a gap in programs and any gaps in programs and services and facilities. And it also includes short-term, mid-term, and long-term recommendations. It also discusses trends. Lastly, it discusses existing standards, reviews program services and fees, and funding strategies. The report was initially presented to the Commission in June by staff, and tonight we have Julie Spear and Lauren Livingston from the Sports Management Group to present to you the needs assessment. Turn it over to Julie and Lauren.
Thank you. Good evening, and it's a pleasure to be with you tonight. Would you go ahead? I'm Lauren Livingston from the Sports Management Group, and the Sports Management Group is a national consulting firm. We happen to be based in Berkeley and have been privileged to have worked with about 450 communities around the country, and certainly many in California. And from this experience, we think we're enriched because we see the best practices of departments and learn strategies that they've developed to deal with very diverse issues across the country. And it was with great pleasure that we undertook this project. And Carrie has already described very well what this process was about, and we were pleased to see that the general plan had incorporated most of the policy recommendations that had been made. Again, I won't repeat these because Carrie did a good job of summarizing what the tasks were. And again, I think the importance of the update to the 1992 master plan is certainly one of the desired outcomes from this work. Go ahead. And just more about the study objectives, and on to the next. And there were, when we're talking about assessing what a need is, that can be somewhat difficult to quantify, and so we use a whole variety of tools, and Julie's going to talk about the specifics of some of them, but a couple that were really, I think, important to this process are the survey, the statistically valid survey, which really gave us some good information. And not to be discounted was the virtual town hall that we held, where over 306 people responded, and so it gave us a good balance. But we're in assessing the need, we're looking both qualitatively and quantitatively at what that need is. We use demographics. We use a whole variety of tools that are listed here, and Julie's going to talk a little bit about those.
Okay. Hello. Okay. So we wanted to share with you that this process included a whole spectrum of tools, from the talking with staff and doing interviews to the, virtual town hall and this kind of web-based kind of social media type. So the emphasis was to capture as much input, community input. And I have to say, staff really stressed that they wanted to know what the community was thinking and feeling. And hence they did that study, which was the statistically valid study, and the results were really good because people really did respond to that where they may not on a one-to-one basis. So part of the study approach was these bullet items. Oh, that's fine. And based on that, what we found out is Vacaville is family friendly. That and ta-da! What we really discovered is that your age groups here are staying in place. Your younger seniors are staying here. They appreciate the services that are being provided to them. They appreciate the open space. Vacaville is a choice for them as far as a place to live. Your family forming age group happens to be the largest, however, which means those are the adults who are also choosing to settle here in Vacaville, which means that your large segment of youth will continue on. And so, you heard in the earlier presentation by staff, which was terrific, the programming is diverse, it's innovative, it's trend-setting, they're having fun, and those are all the aspects that your community really appreciates. So you really do have a whole spectrum from, the younger ones to your retirement age, and we don't want to excuse that older age group because they're staying here. So, your McBride Senior Center is going to evolve because we're in reality becoming younger as seniors. So those programming needs are in demand for a longer period of time. So part of our research is looking at trends and how trends affect, the programming piece and actually your park piece and what your community is going to demand. And remember, we're looking to 2030. We're trying to help you plan for the future and assess what's happening today. And part of these trend sets are things that we do find on a national level. Some impact communities more than other things. Here, it's the baby boomers, the sandwich generation. These are adults that find themselves caring for their own children and also caring for the parents, the aging parents. So they have a need where spaces and programming occurs all at the same time for all these age groups, and we're finding that demand growing. Environmental sensitivity, you have a really environmentally conscious department. They understand the parks. When we had the community public forum, people applauded the efforts of what's happening out in the hiking and trails and open spaces, and that's what your community is looking for. The purpose of sustainability and recreation trends is to make things last longer, repurpose, reuse, and you tend to really do that very well with your facilities. And sometimes we tend to do that almost too well. and we have to look at, what do we factor into the rebuild and, the remake piece of things. And multi-generational, that's kind of a theme throughout this report that we found, is that the mindset here needs to move to more of the, programming all in one place for many different age segments. And again, we can't look at your community services department offerings in a vacuum. We really got to look at, who else is out there providing services, and that's your other service providers, it's the school district, which is another facility provider, what's happening in Fairfield, what's happening in Solano County, what's happening at Travis, because these are all factors that impact. People have choices, and they base a lot of decisions on fees and variety and marketability, and so these are all things that we took into consideration. So, to the good news. When we did the statistically valid survey, we found out that your community services department is doing a great job marketing. They really, truly are, and I think you experienced that a little earlier in these presentations. We were actually pleasantly surprised how many people were aware there was a community services department activity guide. That's tremendous. I was looking at your activity guide that's just out now for your winter, and there's diversity, there's fun classes, there's as I consider some risk-taking classes. In other words, you don't want to do the tried and true over and over. You want to do some fun things. The dog day in the pool, that is the newest trend out there in the pools, and people are loving it. And you have a very dog-friendly community, so I'm sure that they're embracing that one. The other important factor here is that 65% of those surveyed responded that they had participated with their children in a program over the past year. That's tremendous. They're looking at your guide, they're wanting to partake, there's enough offerings that people find interest there. So that's a trend we would certainly encourage you to keep working at, which is why they said they would like more youth activities and programs, because they're expecting it. They find it enticing to them, and so they'd like to see more. You always want more of a good thing. And then the other side of things, which we always know is the cost factor, is we want more restrooms in these outdoor spaces that are open and accessible, yet you still need to have facilities out there. So the survey is saying the community services department is doing a good job, and they really are. They support the department, and they stand behind what's happening, especially with the maintenance and the facility availability. This also falls into the trends. There's high interest in hiking, biking, and jogging. We weren't surprised to find that, and that's something that is vibrant to Vacaville. And 60% would like more. They want more access to open space and improvements and open bikeways. So that all ties into your goal of having, interconnected systems within the city where people can move from one space to another without using the car, So that all fits in. Also, the survey discovered, and it's probably not a surprise to you, is that they would like to see more in the way of community gardens, dog parks, the multi-use recreation center, gymnasium space, lots of basketball players out there with no place to play, and eventually another pool. So 81%, can you imagine 81% of your community is aware of the community services department and the role they play in the city services? That's high. That's like being the police department with the acknowledgement of the community. There is support for funding measures, which you've already experienced. And again, your community, and I need to stress this, they're not just saying they want to, they are out there walking, biking, and jogging. They're using your open spaces. It's very important to this community, and which relates to there's a good use of your available resources. So even though your resources are not necessarily improved, people are using them or desire to use them. And then there is increased requests for indoor spaces. So we were asked to work on the recommendations and kind of look at them in a time frame. And there's many factors that go into working through a list of recommendations that may be focused on a lot of other factors that are not within our control at this point. So, these are definitely suggestions, things that we think are doable. They do require some initial steps, whether it's master planning or, deciding which is the priority of the projects or initiating some policy. So we looked at the matrix of the recommendations and we put them into intermediate, meaning something you can start working on right away, short, mid, and long-term goals. That'll get us to 2030. So when we came up with this recommended list of actions, we don't do this again in a vacuum. We have to look at your community values, at least the way that we understand and interpret them. We look at your compliance for codes and regulations. How does this fit into your general plan? What's the update? What's been the priority? What's not been accomplished? Also, what's actionable? Especially when we look at immediate, what are things that you can do right now that a master plan is only as good as it's doable. So we did not want to put something before you that it was going to end up on a shelf. You know, we wanted to give you some things that you really could jump on and decide to make some decisions with. You also need to be aware that it respond to opportunities. So when we say, you know, maybe you look at the third dog park in 10 years, there may be an opportunity that comes up next year. So it's not static. You know, we want something that's movable and you can look at it within the scheme of the priorities that you have. And then always the funding. You need to talk about the funding. How are we going to pay to play? So we decided we'd jump into a little bit about funding and talk about strategies. And again, these are strategies. You need to be aware that, you know, we can all dream, we can all visualize, but without commitment and without setting priorities and getting your process in place, you're not able to move forward. And some of the funding options do incorporate what's happening with your general plan. So this is an opportune time, you know, to be talking about strategy and opportunities. So we showed you or shared with you in the report a whole spectrum of ideas. One of them is the measure that's already been passed. We think this is a great opportunity to provide some input to council as far as how they prioritize, you know, what they would like to see happen with that money and where it goes. So this is a document that hopefully will give you some structure and some validity as far as what should be first, what should be second. You know, and looking at your current resources, we know the department's doing very well with the limited resources and funding that they have. And everything's a general fund impact. We understand that. You know, you have 15 full-time staff from 22 still doing the same level, if not more, in their program offerings, which is to be very commended here. And, you know, scholarships, there's some things that you're doing actually very well right now, and that's partnering and getting scholarships going and making opportunities available to those who may be not able to afford the fees. Yet your cost recovery, as we saw, is still very high. I think last fiscal year you were at 71%. That's tremendous, and I think that your council has been looking for about 60 to 65%. So the more you can build in that cost recovery, the more you can provide some leeway in your program funding in other areas. So this is just another list of possibilities. You know, I'm sure you've heard a lot about the developer fees. You know, there's sales taxes, general operation bonds, there's infrastructure financing. You know, there's a lot of opportunities. What we suggest is that it's not going to take one vehicle. It's going to be kind of a strategy of how you intermix a lot of vehicles. One of them is the Quimby Act and how that plays into providing funding, because as we go through this, you'll find that you're falling a little bit behind on your facilities, infrastructure, and your parks. So let's now go to the fun stuff and back to the immediate goals. And these are things that we thought that, you know, you could take a look at today, meaning, you know, over the course of the next year. And a lot of it refers to the general plan that the city is going through at this point. One of the issues, and that was a theme for us, is the multi-generational. And when we say define it, you know, you have to have a comfort level with what that means to you. Multi-generational, as we expressed in our program, emphasis is about, you know, being able to program for different age segments in one location. Multi-generational centers are more, and we say a trend, and it seems trendy, but it's really not. It's more a substantial way of integrating programming into one place. So you'll see in the classifications that you could use another senior center. Well, instead of building just a senior center, you incorporate senior components in a multi-generational center, and you're able to hit both requirements. Thank you. So here's your facility standards, and this is based on residents served, and just like many things, it's really the culture of the community, what is priority to you. You know, we found, you know, tennis courts in many communities are very high in use and high in priority. It's not so, at least what we discovered in Vacaville. really soccer, basketball, those indoor and outdoor sports, field sports, are really what is priority to your community residents. So we showed you the facility standard for residents served based on the population, and then where you sit in 2012. And this is the number of facilities that we found. But based on the population for 2030, and remember, we're trying to plan for the future, that last column is the listing of facilities that you're going to be short in order to accommodate a population of 129,000 people. Now, whether you'll reach 129,000 in 2030 is a question, but this at least gives you what the standard is and what the goals may be. And you'll discover, looking here, where the shortfall is. And again, it's your gymnasium, it's your soccer fields, and basketball courts. So now we go to the park side. And on the park standards, what we find is there's the three categories: neighborhood, community, and city park. The city has established a standard of 4.5 acres per 1,000 residents. And right now, today, you're falling behind on that, and that's something to really be concerned about. And I think you're at about 3.1 acre per 1,000 residents. So without some change in whether it's policy or financing or development, you're going to even fall further and further behind. So incorporated what we discovered in the general plan today was some of the recommendations that we made in this plan, which is terrific. And one of the things that I'm most proud of is that we said, gee, it would be nice to design every neighborhood park so it's not cookie cutter, because we find Vacaville is not a cookie cutter kind of community. And it's not, I want the same as the next neighborhood. There's more personality to your neighborhoods, we discovered. And so one of the recommendations, and it may not seem like very important in its statement, but really is, because it's trying to capture what each neighborhood would like, whether it's, they would like an area for the dogs, or if they would like a splash pad area, what's important to that neighborhood. And what that does about that unique character means that your park staff needs to get involved early in the process so that they make sure that there's enough land space, how it's sited on the footprint, and that these things are incorporated in the plan. And then some of the other things that we've talked about is definitely funding related, the citywide landscape and lighting and maintenance assessment districts, something that really needs to be considered. The Quimby ordinance, again, requiring staff to be involved early in those planning stages. And then we would like to recommend that the park impact fees have an adjuster clause so that it keeps up, so that when you are ready to develop these parks, you have the appropriate amount of money to do so. Without an adjustment factor, you can never catch up. Operationally, it was really, I have to admit, difficult, because you have a well-run, well-operated group of staff who's doing a lot more with a lot less, and it's pretty evident. So they have to be very streamlined. They have to be very standardized in some of the processes. Volunteer programs, do tend to fall off the table when we're starting to cut. You do account for almost $200,000 worth of volunteer effort. And so, the next step to there would be have somebody, whether it's a volunteer, who works with all those volunteers and cultivates and even builds that program up even more. And they could be instrumental in your, open space, putting up trail signs, helping with hosting, doing park surveys. So that's the nexus, is to formalize more of that volunteer program. Another area that can be looked at right away is to evaluate your joint use agreements. These are wonderful community services. You have a joint use with the soccer group. However, somebody needs to start making those timelines and deadlines realistic and say, are we really going to achieve the goals in this joint use agreement? If not, what is the plan? What are we going to do differently? And so, a real hard assessment of joint use. And the agreement itself can stay the same. It's just a realization that you're not going to achieve the goals within that agreement as stated. The other area is your winter pool rates. You know, we saw your aquatics numbers, the programming. They're doing quite a bit in the programming. But you might want to take a look at your agreement with the swim club, especially the winter months. You know, operationally, to keep the pool open, it costs money. And so it's more of a reality. What is the actual cost of that? And then what are they offsetting it? And, you know, is that a comfort level for City Council? And then your field preparation. My understanding is that Public Works is out there and they're helping to get the fields ready for these youth sport teams. You know, maybe we should look at an assessment on that, what that cost is, and maybe that's the trade-off with volunteer hours for some of these other areas. So we've already gone through some of this. As far as general plan policy, why we said establish a lead policy, and it may not be the priority item for this commission, but you should be aware that incorporating LEED, which is, you know, green components to design, will affect all of your building and facility projects. And so you want to be cognizant of that. Many times the LEED components are cost more initially, and it's over the spectrum of the lifespan of the facility where you recoup that initial higher end cost. And so that's something that, you know, you should really take into consideration, especially when you get these building projects before you. So a few more short-term goals would be, you know, we were talking about draft special use facilities policy, what, you know, what those facilities would be, what they look like, what, you know, some kind of standards to that. That would help with your neighborhood park development eventually, or any of your facilities in the recommended long term. And also develop your open space and trails maintenance standards. You know, what's the minimum that you would expect out there? And you're probably already doing it. It's just putting it in writing. And then short-term goals, provide brochures and maps, especially for your outdoor spaces. You know, get people, they want to be out there and they're out there. So now, you know, just provide them another tool so that they can do some more walking, biking, and horseback riding. You know, look at your facilities for energy efficiencies. That's probably another area. I know your gymnasium space has challenges. So that's something you may want to look at. You know, Lagoon Valley Park is another resource that Vacaville is really fortunate to have in its back pocket. It's just how do you develop it and how do you fund it? And then the other area is the shaded spaces, and you see that at the pool. You know, I think what we're finding is that aquatic centers are becoming more social gathering spaces, and not necessarily everybody gets in the pool. So you want to have a little more shade for those people who are not, but who are there to bring their family members. So some more operational ideas is, you know, incorporate dog parks into your existing sites. Maybe look at utilizing some areas that are underutilized. Look at master planning more, especially with your soccer. You really have a big need and a call for soccer. So maybe look community-wide, as well as Centennial Park. And, you know, Georgie Duke Center is certainly a gem of a facility as far as its use, and maybe look at ways that's possible to expand that facility, whether it's smaller, several more smaller courts for the younger age group, and just focus on youth sports at that facility. So midterm goals is establish performance measures on many of these areas, programming areas. The park intercepts is to go out there and survey, find out what the park people, visitors, what they really want. Do they want more facilities as far as picnic benches and water fountains or dog fountains, or, you know, do they just want it left unsettled and in its natural state? perform the cost recovery analysis is more a reflection of the department is doing really well in its recovery. Without being council directed as far as having a mandate as this is what you need to recoup. So maybe put that more in a standard. You have 100% cost recovery in some program areas, so maybe that's more of a standard, and in other areas it's understood that you'll be at 50% or 60%. But that's something that you should really look at. And then talked about Creek Walk events, which is tremendous. You do some great special events, and the Creek Walk is evolving. And we had RDA financing, which was a wonderful tool, and it got the communities together. And our assessment of it is that a minimal fee for a great event is very open to community use. In other words, it doesn't have to be the end all. If you charge at an event, you can always provide an avenue for those who cannot afford and are used to not paying to still participate. However, we're saying that these community events should be a little more self-supporting, and charging a minimal fee is something that should be supported. So we're talking about trails. Look at your maintenance program, provide more signage. That's going to happen over the years. Let people know where they are. Look at restrooms. Everybody wants restrooms out there. And then the third dog park is something that needs to be analyzed. We saw the comment that somebody would like one big, general dog park area. There's pros and cons to that. People are walking, and they're walking with their dogs. So you really want them to go to areas that are within walking distance. And to get all those dogs into one area is probably, something that has to be considered for safety and other factors. I think the point here is that it's a dog community, and you need dog spaces. So whether it's a dog park or just dog areas, you need to really start incorporating that in your park plans. Midterm goals. These get harder. These get harder and bigger. Some of the things that we talked about, and because you're so well used and so well thought of as your facilities, is that you probably do need to look at upgrading some of your kitchen areas, because they're becoming event centers, and so people expectation of what they can use the kitchen for grows with that expectation of use. So your kitchen areas are probably going to need some renovation. Also, the preschool room at the Three Oaks, it's well served, well loved, and it's flexible. And we're thinking that, as you evolve and get more spaces, it would be nice to have a dedicated preschool area, and it can be used for birthday parties on the weekends, and these preschool classes or specialty classes during the week. And then the big one, need a new gym. And you probably need a minimum of 3 full-size basketball courts. Right now your adult basketball is not being served, and there really is a need out there. So you'll be looking at doing a gym here. And then after the gym, we talk about a multi-generational recreation center. And again, we call it multi-generational because we're thinking that you're going to incorporate the senior components. But you can have senior programming, teen programming, and the fitness all in one center. And this is another opportunity. We stated that we're going to need another pool by 2030 to have, an indoor pool or adjacent pool that's part of this multi-generational center. And it'll make it different enough from your Walter Graham Aquatic Center that people will have a choice between the two of them. And then again. So we want to thank you. This was a wonderful I think, ending to our little story here about what's happening in 2030, because we wanted to point out what happened, in your recent past, and that is your Great Wonders playground. Your community is really behind you. They're supportive, and they're willing to help fund and build. And I think this is just the plan to help move things forward and get some of those new facilities. So if you have any questions, we're here to answer.
Commissioner Ramos? Couple, if I may. Third dog park? Did I miss the second?
Did I not have a
Did I miss
second? We have one.
We're one.
I think midterm goals. I'm sorry. So something you could do a little sooner. The third dog park is your further out one.
Okay, so there's a second and a
Yes.
third. Thank you.
Yes, sorry.
I lost that. And then the second thing is, can we go back to a comment you made when you were opening about repurposing, and we do that almost too well, and
It's Georgia Duke is what I'm referencing, and
Is that it?
yeah, you're doing wonderful things at Georgia Duke today, but there was chairs out there for the spectator seating, and they were moving them around, and it just seemed like a lot was happening program-wise in that facility, and that's a really wonderful repurpose of it. But I think you could use a lot more space there, so that's what was my reference to that.
Okay,
I
thank you.
think when we're talking about repurpose or multi-use, it's really maintaining the integrity of the space for its intended purpose. And so it gets back to that qualitative issue again, that you want the space to be as good as it can be for whatever activity it's really planned to do. And there's multi-use and there's multi-uselessness when you try to do too much with space.
For instance, when I was there, the teams were trying to come together. I guess it was new. It must have been new coaches with the team, and they were all gathering out in that little tiny lobby, and there was just no space for people to get in and out. And so that's my thought about repurposing. That lobby space is the team meeting space, and it's the parent pickup space, and it's the check-in space, and there's just not enough space.
And did you visit the skate center where our co-ed volleyball is?
Yes, next where gymnastics is?
Yes.
Yes, I did.
And you visited that?
Yes.
Okay. And your thoughts?
It would be the same. It's a small space that's being asked to do a lot of different things, and I'm not sure that it's doing any one of them to its full capacity. It would be better to dedicate it a little bit more and decide what it's going to be. Georgia Duke, had a lot of youth there at the time, and then people were trying to get through to the boxing room in the back. That's the same thing at the gymnastics and skating and basketball, and it's doing a lot of things, and I'm not sure it's really accommodating everybody's needs.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Well, I just wanted to say that a lot of the topics that you brought up are going to tie in with my report on the general plan update. Hiking, biking, open space, community gardens, dog parks, gymnasium space, and formalize the volunteer program. I work for the library, and they depend a lot on volunteers also, and there is a volunteer coordinator. So, yes, it's not unheard of. Not a hard thing to do. No more questions, no more comments.
Not really a question per se, but a very impressive study, and I think it kind of reaffirms what we knew per se.